to receive, he had to find something, anything, that someone else might actually want. For the next 2 days, the man stopped asking for money. He spent that time trying to reconcile his long-held belief that he was empty with this new requirement to provide value. While sitting by the tracks, he noticed a patch of wildflowers growing in the gravel. He gathered a handful, deciding they would be his currency. He returned to his spot, but with a different protocol. Now, whenever someone handed him a coin, he gave them a flower in return. He didn't wait for his mindset to change before he acted. Instead, he changed his physical behavior, providing his brain with a new set of interactions to observe. The response from the passengers shifted. They weren't just dropping coins out of pity anymore. They were smiling and thanking him, engaging in a social exchange that felt like a fair trade. As he continued, he began to see a direct relationship between the inventory he held and the money he collected. These two metrics mirrored one another. The more flowers he had to offer, the more people were willing to give. When he ran out of flowers, his income dropped almost immediately. This small-scale economy showed that even in a railway station, the willingness of others to give is tied directly to what they perceive they are receiving in return. When the businessman returned weeks later, the man approached him not with a plea, but with a product. The businessman took the flowers and remarked, "Today, you are no longer a beggar. You have become a businessman." In that moment, he realized he was no longer an object of pity. He was a participant in the market. Although he was still standing in the same station wearing the same clothes, he stopped looking for a handout and started looking for a trade. That shift in how he viewed his own utility changed his entire trajectory. 6 months later, the two men met again as equals. The former beggar was now running a flower business, traveling the rails not to ask for alms, but to expand his trade. His success followed a change in his self-perception. By viewing himself as a provider of value rather than a recipient of charity, he unlocked a potential that had always been there but was previously ignored. This aligns with self-concept theory, which posits that our behavior is a reflection of the labels we accept for ourselves. If we label ourselves as having nothing, we act as if we have nothing. Examine the areas of your life where you feel stuck. If you are waiting for a result without considering what you are bringing to the exchange, you are likely working under an old label. When you change how you see your own value, you change what you are capable of achieving. We spend hours searching for the exact morning routine, the precise productivity hack, the endless tutorials. We convince ourselves success requires mastering complicated rules. When we step into a new field and encounter systems we don't understand, imposter syndrome hits. We assume that because we don't know the proper terminology or the accepted methods, we are amateurs playing a game we cannot win. Leo Tolstoy captured this exact dynamic in a short story. He introduced an archbishop, the ultimate gatekeeper of the right way. This was a man wrapped in royal robes and golden crowns. He held the power to dictate who was recognized as a saint and who was a heretic. His entire life was built on memorizing and enforcing rigid texts. He represents a trap we all fall into, confusing the mastery of an institution's complex rules with actual mastery of the craft itself. Look at this space. This is the Archbishop's domain. It is ornate, intimidating, and built on centuries of approved methods. But despite all his perfect rituals, his church was completely empty. The congregation had vanished. Instead of attending his highly structured services, the people were walking miles to seek out 3 illiterate hermits. These hermits lived on the far side of a massive lake, entirely removed from the Archbishop's jurisdiction and his strict oversight. Furious that his authority was bypassed, the Archbishop, dressed in full regalia, grabbed his golden symbols of power and boarded a wooden boat. He was going to expose these frauds and force them to fall in line. When unregulated, unfiltered methods start getting results, the immediate instinct of an institutional gatekeeper is to shut them down. Crossing the lake, the Archbishop finds no grand leaders. He finds simple, rugged people sitting quietly under a tree, completely devoid of institutional polish. He interrogates them and discovers they cannot even read. They do not own the heavy, dense texts of the faith, and they certainly haven't memorized the proper liturgies. When asked how they pray, they share an embarrassingly short, homemade chant: "You are three, we are three. Have mercy on us." This diagram illustrates a psychological trap known as complexity bias. This is the human tendency to assume that complex systems carry more weight and are naturally superior to simple ones. The Archbishop falls right into this trap. Internally, he is delighted. He equates their raw simplicity with profound ignorance, confirming his own superiority. So he implements a fix. He spends the entire day forcing the hermits into a grueling memorization session, making them repeat the long, officially approved church prayer over and over until they get it right. Finally, they recite it back. The Archbishop boards his boat and sails away into the night, immensely satisfied that he has restored proper institutional order. But halfway across the lake, shouting pets through the darkness. The boatman points behind them. The Archbishop turns to see the three simple hermits literally sprinting across the surface of the deep water, moving as easily as if they were on solid ground. They reach the side of the boat in a panic, apologizing profusely. In their rush, they had already forgotten the complex words he spent all day teaching them. Their absolute, unpolished rules he worshipped were suddenly entirely irrelevant. The Archbishop stares at the men standing on the water, and his hands go slack. The heavy, golden symbol of his authority slips from his fingers. In that moment, he realizes that his perfectly grammatical, beautifully structured, institutionally approved prayers hold zero actual weight. They are empty. He bows down low in the boat. He tells them to forget everything he said, to ignore his complex teachings, and to simply go back to doing things their own way. True power and validity do not require an institution's stamp of approval. If the underlying belief and dedication are absolute, the method validates itself. Tolstoy wrote this as a universal philosophy about human output, not a literal religious fable. He was highlighting a distinction between the performance of a task and its essence. The hermits succeeded because their internal drive was so concentrated that the external procedure became secondary. We often get lost in the technical how-to, the business plan, the rigid syntax, the specific brushstrokes, and forget that these are merely tools meant to serve a core objective. Tolstoy's hermits didn't need a script because their focus was so absolute it generated its own momentum. That same intensity often separates work that merely follows the rules from work that actually resonates with an audience. Operating with that level of pure intent allows a person to reach the point where the result transcends the very rules used to create it. This animated map shows Europe in July 1940. By this point, Adolf Hitler's forces had rapidly conquered nearly every surrounding nation. Austria, Poland, Norway, Belgium, Denmark, and France had all fallen under German control. Only one major country stood in the way of complete Western European dominance. The UK was effectively isolated across the English Channel, surrounded by hostile borders. Adolf Hitler assumed the math was simple. Facing overwhelming military odds and an isolated geography, he believed the British government would rationally surrender and sign a peace treaty. Winston Churchill refused. He made it perfectly clear to both his citizens and the advancing German army that Britain would fight on the beaches, in the fields, and in the streets, but they would never surrender. This refusal presented Germany with a massive geographic problem. There is no land bridge connecting the UK to mainland Europe, and the British Royal Navy possessed significantly more ships than the German fleet. To overcome this water barrier, Hitler had to attempt an invasion from the sky. The resulting air campaign brought immense destruction. German bombers targeted civilian centers, leaving massive sections of the London skyscape in ruins. But instead of breaking British morale, the attacks provoked severe aerial retaliation against Berlin. Because the British were defending their actual homes, their psychological motivation outmatched the invading forces. They successfully stalled the German advance, forcing a frustrated and increasingly power-hungry dictator to look elsewhere to expand his empire. Despite already fighting a massive war in the West, Hitler broke a non-aggression pact and turned his sights toward the Soviet Union. He believed capturing a territory as vast as the Soviets would give Germany enough land and resources to surpass any nation on Earth. This map illustrates the scale of that ambition. In June 1941, he launched a massive three-pronged invasion. One force moved north toward Leningrad, a second pushed straight for Moscow, and a third cut south through Ukraine. Using a strategy of rapid mechanized warfare, known as blitzkrieg, highly advanced German tank divisions swiftly broke through Soviet lines and captured vast stretches of territory. But that speed created a fatal logistical trap. By moving eastward rapidly, German supply lines stretched incredibly thin, just as the brutal Russian winter hit. Sub-zero temperatures physically incapacitated the German army. Equipment froze, and troops lacked proper winter gear. This severe weather shifted the advantage directly back to the Soviet defenders, who were well adapted to fighting in the extreme cold. By attempting to absorb the most expansive terrain on the planet, the German military had stretched its physical and logistical capabilities to a breaking point. While Germans froze in the east, a separate conflict exploded in the Pacific. In December 1941, Japan launched an unprovoked attack on America's Pearl Harbor. This wasn't limited to the Pacific for long. In strategic solidarity with Japan, Hitler declared war on the United States just days later. This choice turned America's massive industrial base and troop numbers against Germany, officially merging these separate conflicts into one global war. Meanwhile, back on the Eastern Front, the German army engaged in the Battle of Stalingrad. It became the deadliest prolonged conflict of the entire war, ultimately ending in a total defeat that devastated German troop numbers. To the south, Hitler's alliance with Italy was actively collapsing. Set up with the war and harsh living conditions, armed civilians, known as partisans, revolted against their own government and executed dictator Benito Mussolini. By the end of 1943, aggressive expansion had created a coalition of highly motivated enemies. The world's major powers were now fully synchronized in a multi-front counterattack. On June 6, 1944, a coalition of British, American, and Canadian soldiers landed on the beaches of northern France, opening a massive western front against the occupying German army. Looking at the map, you can clearly see the direct consequence of overextension. Germany was caught in a closing vice, with millions of Allied soldiers simultaneously pushing inward from the west, the east, and the south. The Soviet army steadily regained its territory and pushed straight into the German capital. With Berlin completely surrounded and his empire dismantled, Hitler took his own life, leading to Germany's formal surrender. The global fighting continued for another 2 months in the Pacific theater, only coming to a final close after the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japanese cities. The total collapse of the Nazi regime was the result of a military machine failing under the pressure of fighting across thousands of miles of territory against 3 industrial powers at once. In the aftermath, the Allied powers physically redrew the map of Europe. They divided Germany into distinct eastern and western territories and shifted the boundaries of neighboring nations like Poland to reflect a new balance of power. To prevent a conflict of this scale from repeating, the international community established the United Nations. It provided a formal global framework to mediate disputes before they escalated into open warfare. To maintain this peace, former enemies France and Germany formed the European Coal and Steel Committee. The goal was to make their economies so interdependent on materials like coal and steel that a future war between them would become physically impossible. This cooperation eventually grew into the European Union. By replacing military expansion with economic integration, these nations have managed to maintain a period of peace on the continent that has lasted. On February 1, 2003, the NASA space shuttle Columbia was descending toward Earth. It was supposed to be the final, celebratory leg of a routine 16-day mission in orbit. Inside Mission Control, capsule communicator Charlie Hobaugh hailed the spacecraft. He asked Commander Rick Husband about some unusual tire pressure readings flashing on the ground monitors. Husband started to reply. Mission Control heard him say, "Roger, Ba," and then silence. 10 minutes passed with no response. Down below, observers looking up at the Texas sky saw a bright, blazing light streaking through the atmosphere. Seconds later, it splintered into multiple glowing fragments, raining debris over the ground. NASA's Space Transportation System was built on heavy monitoring and endless inspections. Yet somehow, this massive 100-ton reusable spacecraft had completely disintegrated on re-entry. A few hours later, President George W. Bush addressed the country, confirming's worst. Columbia was lost. All 7 crew members were dead. Among the crew was mission specialist Kalpana Chawla. As the first woman of Indian origin to travel to space, her presence on that shuttle represented a massive milestone. She grew up in the 1960s in Haryana, India, in a highly conservative environment where girls were routinely discouraged from pursuing technical careers. She ignored those pressures entirely, earning degrees in aerospace engineering, a PhD in the United States, and ultimately her place at NASA. Spaceflight is inherently dangerous, but investigators had to determine if this brilliant engineer died because of the unavoidable risks of crossing into the cosmos, or if she was failed by the institution that sent her there. To figure out what went wrong, investigators first had to look inside the cockpit. They needed to rule out pilot error or a hasty decision made by the crew. The data showed the crew had executed their mission flawlessly. Over 16 days, they worked in shifts to complete around 80 complex scientific experiments, including advanced studies on cancer cells and combustion in microgravity. And a video recording from inside the cabin at 8:58 a.m., just minutes before the disaster, shows the astronauts laughing and casually chatting. They had absolutely no idea anything was wrong. No one in that cabin made a mistake. The brutal truth was that the crew of STS-107 was doomed well before the shuttle even began scraping against the Earth's atmosphere. The actual physical cause of the destruction didn't happen during re-entry. It happened 16 days earlier, exactly 81 seconds after Columbia lifted off the launch pad. As the shuttle climbed, a piece of insulation foam broke away from the external fuel tank. It measured 60 by 40 centimeters and weighed barely 750 grams. But because the shuttle was accelerating so rapidly, that lightweight foam hit the leading edge of Columbia's left wing with a relative velocity of 700 to 900 kilometers per hour. The impact punched a small hole right through the carbon composite panels, severely compromising the shuttle's thermal protection system. For 2 weeks in the vacuum of space, this hole didn't matter, but during re-entry, it became a death sentence. Superheated atmospherophases forced their way inside the breach, melting the aluminum structure of the wing from the inside out, destroying the telemetry sensors and violently tearing the shuttle apart. A piece of foam lighter than a loaf of bread possessed enough kinetic energy to completely obliterate a 100-ton vehicle. That is the physical explanation, but the official investigation revealed a much darker reality. NASA personnel knew about the foam strike while Columbia was still safely orbiting the Earth. NASA engineers realized the wing might be damaged and actively begged mission managers to request spy satellite imagery from the Department of Defense to get a clear look at the impact zone. Management flatly refused the request. When the Columbia Accident Investigation Board published its report, they pointed to a psychological trap called the normalization of deviance. This occurs when an organization repeatedly experiences an abnormal, dangerous event without a disaster, causing them to treat the danger as a normal, acceptable risk. They looked at launch photos and realized that foam strikes had occurred on 65 out of 79 previous shuttle missions. None of those missions ended in a crash, so management complacently assumed this strike would be harmless too. Columbia was physically destroyed by a piece of foam, but it was doomed by a culture of institutional arrogance that chose to ignore its own engineers. 5 years later, an official crew survival report confirmed how the astronauts spent their final moments. When the shuttle lost structural integrity, rapid depressurization caused the crew to lose consciousness within seconds. They were mercifully spared the intense heat and violence of the actual breakup. In the aftermath, top NASA officials resigned. The entire space shuttle program was grounded for 2.5 years, while investigators carefully reconstructed the wreckage on massive hangar floors and mandated a complete redesign of the external tank's foam ramps. The nation was left to mourn 7 individuals who dedicated and ultimately lost their lives in the pursuit of scientific discovery. Kalpana Chawla once tried to explain how spaceflight changed her perspective on humanity. She said, "When you look at the stars in the galaxy, you feel that you are not just from any particular piece of land, but from the solar system." She left behind incredible, tangible legacies. Roundworms from her microgravity experiment survived the crash in aluminum containers, contributing to future research. Her efforts established a program that continues to send Indian high school girls to NASA Space School. And today, an asteroid named 51826 Kalpana Chawla orbits the sun in her honor. A preventable failure inside the agency ended her life, but Kalpana Chawla's relentless drive, pushing from a small town in India all the way out into the stars, remains an Across the Asian continent, geographic and cultural divides represent some of the most extreme variations on the planet. Billions of people are separated by massive mountain ranges, thousands of distinct languages, and borders defined by centuries of friction. On the global stage, these nations typically operate in isolation. In many cases, their primary interactions are defined by direct political or economic opposition. There are very few arenas where representatives from across this landmass interact directly, let alone on equal footing. The baseline state of the continent is a collection of neighbors who share borders, but rarely share a neighborhood. Every few years, the Asia Cup emerges as a visible exception to this isolationist default. The event is built on a paradox. It creates a moment of regional unity by leaning directly into fierce nationalistic rivalry. When these nations collide on the pitch, the result isn't chaos. Instead, the friction generates what players and fans call the spirit of the Asia Cup. This raises a central question. How can a crucible of historical rivalry produce a shared continental experience? The tournament format is designed to force interaction. It takes nations that share immediate borders and draws them into a single, centralized hub. Because of this regional proximity, the emotional and political stakes are significantly higher than they are in a standard global tournament. It functions as a pressure cooker, the athletes playing with the weight of historical baggage, while billions of eyes from their own immediate region focus on a single field. The structure ensures there is no way to avoid the confrontation. To advance, teams must repeatedly face the exact neighbors they have clashed with for decades. The spirit of the games doesn't come from a place of polite friendship. It is born from territorial sporting battles. By engineering maximum conflict, the format demands that athletes reach their absolute peak performance. The engine of this event is the fans. In this part of the world, the passion for the game often borders on obsession. This intensity creates a shared experience that briefly supersedes geopolitical tension. In the stands, fans from opposing nations stand side by side, united by the unfolding drama. The players mirror this shift. The demands are so high that extreme rivalry eventually gives way to a visible, mutual respect between opponents. For a few weeks, isolated national pride is channeled into a single, regional spectacle. The spirit of the Asia Cup works because a shared devotion to the game is one of the few forces strong enough to temporarily lower the borders between these nations. When the tournament concludes and the stadium's empty, the impact of these matches persists beyond the boundary rope. In the moment of victory, the celebration serves as a benchmark for the entire region's sporting talent. A win here is recognized across the continent as the pinnacle of regional achievement. This recurring interaction serves a specific purpose. It provides a rare point of contact where regional conversation is defined by competition rather than conflict. The tournament shows that while historical divisions remain deep, they are not the only force that can bring these people together. Sport provides a shared vocabulary. For a brief window, billions of people who might agree on nothing else are debating the same plays and analyzing the same statistics. Ultimately, the Asia Cup isn't a replacement for diplomacy. It is a recurring stage where the region stops being a collection of isolated nations. Look at this satellite image. China and South Korea are glittering with light, but sandwiched between them is a dark void. That is North Korea. To understand what happens in that darkness, look at Shin Dong-hyuk. He was born inside North Korea's political prison camp 14. The conditions there were so brutal that he survived by eating grass and rats. Survival drove his every decision. At age 13, hoping for extra food, he reported his own mother's plan to escape to the guards. She was executed. That level of extreme conditioning is the result of a series of interlocking systems designed to automate obedience. To understand how this country functions, we have to look at it as a closed loop, a system built to define what is real and what is not for its people. The state manages the physical interface of its citizens' daily lives. This includes absolute control over personal aesthetics, including strict bans on items like blue jeans and red lipstick. This diagram shows the rigid boundaries of personal expression. Citizens must choose from a state-approved roster of exactly 15 distinct styles. To enforce these rules, the government employs a fashion police. They actively patrol the streets, cutting non-compliant clothing and issuing fines to anyone who deviates from the standard. Micromanaging appearances serves a specific purpose. The regime views Western individualism as a threat to the country's internal logic, so they block it at the physical level. This diagram maps the state's sorting algorithm, the Songbun system. It divides the population into 3 rigid tiers: the core, the wavering, and the hostile. Your placement dictates your existence, determining your food, housing, and whether you receive permission to enter the capital. This isolation extends to the digital world. The domestic internet is limited to a handful of state-selected websites. Getting online requires a librarian to sit between users and manually override the connection every few minutes. Even their state-approved smartphones carry automated surveillance. The operating system takes random screenshots while the phone is in use and sends them directly to the government. The Songbun classification and this digital surveillance work in tandem. They ensure citizens remain isolated, unable to access unregulated information or organize against the state. If the physical and digital walls fail, the regime relies on its secret police. They divide every area into neighborhood associations designed specifically to gather intelligence. These associations pressure citizens into spying on each other. Informants exist within homes, eroding the trust between parents, children, and siblings. The ultimate psychological deterrent is the law of guilt by association. This diagram illustrates how the law operates. A single political infraction by one person results in the imprisonment of 3 entire generations of their family. The regime rarely needs to monitor everyone directly. The threat of generational punishment forces the population to police themselves. The entire system rests on a single point of failure: the promise to feed its people. In the 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union cut off cheap fuel and food. The North Korean economy crashed, resulting in a devastating famine where up to 2 million people starved to death. To survive, citizens had to bypass the system. While men remained in unpaid government jobs, women created illegal underground black markets called jangmadong. When the state failed to provide basic survival needs, it accidentally birthed an uncontrollable, decentralized network of grassroots capitalism. These markets evolved rapidly. What started as a way to trade food became a hub for smuggling foreign media, with vendors selling illegal USB drives loaded with South Korean entertainment. This chart shows the scale of the informational breach. According to surveys, 81% of recent defectors possessed these illegal USB drives before leaving the country. Watching these films reveals an outside world that directly contradicts the state's stories. They see a reality the regime spent decades trying to hide. By trading banned goods and watching illegal media together, North Koreans are making a calculation that their neighbor is a partner, not an informant. In a country built on suspicion, this shared defiance is building the very trust the state spent decades trying to destroy. Contracting leprosy in mid-20th century India meant absolute banishment. Patients were systematically stripped of their homes, their families, and their basic rights, driven to the outskirts of towns to survive in total isolation. The standard medical response of the era offered no pathway back. The state enforced strict quarantine, locking away the afflicted primarily to protect the healthy public. It functioned as a living death sentence. The entire public health infrastructure operated as a one-way street. Facilities existed solely to hide patients away from the world, with zero mechanisms built to help them regain any semblance of a normal life. The physical decay caused by the disease was tragic, but the true devastation was social. These individuals were entirely erased from the human community. Murlidhar Devadas Amte, known later as Baba Amte, was an affluent and successful lawyer. His life took a sharp detour after a visceral encounter with a dying leprosy patient, whose suffering confronted Amte with a level of despair he couldn't ignore. Look at the intensity in his eyes here. He quickly realized that tossing coins to beggars or providing temporary medical relief was inadequate. pity-driven charity would never address deep, systemic exile. He needed a different approach. His response was to establish the Maharogi Seva Samiti, an organization designed from the ground up to empower the outcast, rather than merely treat the patient. Amte operated on a radical premise that these physically damaged and socially discarded individuals were capable of building, maintaining, and governing their own self-sustaining society. He didn't invent a new medical cure. His true historical contribution was engineering a working, replicable institutional blueprint for human rehabilitation. Establishing this new society began in the harshest possible conditions. The government granted Amte 50 acres of land in central India, but it was a barren, rocky wilderness infested with scorpions, snakes, and wild animals. He arrived on this inhospitable plot with a starting inventory that defied logic: a handful of severely disabled patients, 14 rupees in capital, and a lame cow. Survival required immediate back-breaking labor. These sprawling rows of thatched roof huts show the massive scale of what they accomplished. With heavily damaged hands, they cleared the brush, broke the rocks, and built their own shelter from the dirt up. They called it Anandwan, or the Forest of Joy. The physical labor was only half the battle. Amte had to convince individuals who had been told their entire lives they were worthless burdens that they were actually capable of heavy agricultural work. By forcing them to rely on their own hands to survive, the very act of constructing Anandwan's infrastructure rebuilt the dignity and psychological agency of its founders. The Maharogi Seva Samiti operated on a strict, unyielding philosophy. Charity destroys, work builds. This flowchart shows how their internal economic engine actually functioned. It started with the soil. They systematically terraced the rocky earth until it became arable land, which eventually yielded enough crops to feed the entire patient community without outside help. To accommodate severe physical limitations, the system adapted. They created small-scale industries, assigning highly specialized craft roles like weaving, carpentry, and metalwork, based entirely on what each individual's body could manage. Then came the crucial tipping point. The internal economy began producing a surplus. The goods were of such high quality that the prejudiced outside world had no choice but to cross the boundary lines and trade with Anandwan. This economic self-reliance achieved a level of integration that medical science couldn't. It forced mainstream society to value leprosy patients as economic equals. Over the decades, the Maharogi Seva Samiti expanded rapidly. The original cluster of huts grew into a sprawling complex, housing formal schools, an agricultural college, and modern hospitals. They strategically opened their doors to other marginalized groups, integrating the blind, the deaf, and orphaned tribals into the ecosystem. The Anandwan model proved it could work for any disenfranchised demographic. As Amte aged, his personal philosophies were systematically codified into institutional laws. The massive operation learned to run smoothly without requiring his direct daily management. The desperate refugee camp in the wilderness had successfully evolved into a highly functional, replicable blueprint for an inclusive municipality. Compare the thriving, highly educated reality of modern Anandwan to the bleak, isolated banishment of the mid-20th century. The contrast is staggering. The sheer operational success of the Samiti rippled outward, directly influencing broader Indian national policies regarding disability rights, rehabilitation, and rural development. The institution definitively proved that the citizen society discards are actually an incredibly rich, untapped well of human capital. Baba Amte provided empirical proof that human dignity is restored through the right to purposeful work.
Look closely at the Indian snack market, and you will find an ecosystem locked down by heavyweights. PepsiCo's Lay's aggressively commands the Western potato chip aisle, while Haldiram's maintains a tight grip on traditional Indian namkeen. This chart highlights the breakdown of that exact market in Gujarat. The tiny slivers at the bottom represent those massive global and national conglomerates. The dominant block taking up 90%. He took a job sweeping floors in a cinema, and it was there that he built the foundation of his empire, methodically identifying and fixing the operational bottlenecks that his larger competitors overlooked. By 1982,
Chandubai had worked his way up to managing the canteen at the Astron Cinema. Over time, he started tracking exactly when and why his customers bought food. He uncovered a severe temporal bottleneck. 80% of his daily revenue came directly from potato wafers, but all of those sales happened within the chaotic 10 to 15-minute window of the movie intermission. His third-party chip suppliers were failing him. They would regularly drop off unpredictable quantities or show up late. When the intermission bell rang and he didn't have enough chips on the counter, that revenue was lost forever. He realized the only way to fix the problem was to cut the suppliers out completely. He set up a makeshift shed in his home compound and started slicing, frying, and bagging the chips himself every single night. This established his first core business thesis. Outsourcing your primary product means outsourcing your vulnerability. Absolute control over the supply chain was the only way to guarantee scale during those 15-minute rushes. Industrial potato peeling and cutting machines were far too expensive for his tiny operation, so he sourced individual mechanical parts and cobbled together his own custom rig for 5,000 rupees. Then he had to solve the chemistry of the fry. An average potato is over 80% water, which makes it difficult to create a crispy, long-lasting chip. This diagram illustrates his target metric. To get a perfect chip, you need exactly 20 to 23% solid dry matter. Through sheer repetition, Chandubai learned to calculate this exact ratio just by holding a raw potato in his hand. Because he kept production costs low and understood the raw materials, he gained a pricing advantage. He took those savings and packed 25 to 30% more chips into every bag. By mastering the microchemistry of his potatoes, Chandubai created a high-yield product that could undercut the market purely on volume. But manual production had a hard limit. As the volume of his orders increased, quality control slipped, and customers began complaining that their chips were turning stale. Chandubai took out a 50 lakh rupee loan to build a semi-automatic manufacturing plant that could finally standardize his quality. Then, in the middle of construction, the third-party engineering contractor went bankrupt. They vanished, leaving Balaji with a half-assembled factory full of customized equipment that they had no idea how to operate. Facing total financial collapse, Chandubai and his brothers started taking the abandoned machinery apart, piece by piece, reverse engineering the mechanics through raw trial and error. They put the plant back together, becoming self-taught engineers. They successfully automated the precise frying processes Chandubai perfected by hand. This crisis forced him past simple management, mastering the facility's mechanics himself to blueprint his future growth. With production running smoothly, they targeted a strategic gap in retail. Lay's focused almost entirely on Western-style potato chips, while Haldiram's sold traditional Indian namkeen. Balaji manufactured both, immediately claiming double the shelf space. They also knew exactly where their biggest rival was vulnerable. Balaji launched a marketing campaign centered on the slogan, "Less air, more wafers," directly attacking the most frequent customer complaint against Lay's. Yet one major bottleneck remained. Their entire operation relied on potato harvests, leaving them exposed to prices that fluctuate wildly based on the unpredictable Indian monsoon season. So they built an enormous 25,000-ton cold storage facility. This allowed them to buy an entire year's worth of inventory during the harvest season when prices were at their lowest and store it safely. Neutralizing raw material price volatility was the final engineering step that locked in their high-volume advantage against competitors paying whatever the market dictated. Today, those early hand-built operations have been replaced by fully automated factories. Balaji Wafers exports to over 25 countries and generates an annual revenue of 5,000 crore rupees. Despite that massive corporate scale, the internal structure remains flat. Chandubai enforces zero rigid HR targets, and every single factory floor worker has his personal phone number to ensure a culture of total ownership. That sense of ownership extends even to his rivals. When a major Haldiram's factory burned down, Balaji opened up their own production lines to manufacture their competitors' products for months just to keep them in business. Chandubai built his multi-billion-dollar empire by systematically eliminating every external dependency. He proved that true market dominance is won on the factory floor through a relentless pursuit of total operational control. On May 20th, 1916, at the Stromness whaling station on South Georgia Island, The manager was finishing a quiet dinner when a worker burst into the room. He urged the manager to step outside to see something impossible. Waiting in the cold were 3 men, haggard, emaciated, and covered in layers of soot and grease. When asked for his name, the man in the center spoke for the first time in 2 years. He said, "Ernest Shackleton." The manager stood frozen. He hadn't heard that name since November 1914. The shock was total, because the world had already mourned them. After months of silence from the Antarctic, the general consensus was that the ice had claimed Shackleton and all 28 of his men. Shackleton's return was a biological miracle. He and his crew had survived 2 years in the most lethal environment on the planet, equipped with nothing but wooden boats and the clothes on their backs, all without a single radio to call for help. In August 1914, the mission was grander than anything attempted before. Shackleton led a hand-picked crew of sailors, doctors, and mechanics with one goal: to be the first humans to cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. But the environment betrayed them. In early 1915, the Weddell Sea didn't just get cold, it froze solid with a speed that trapped their ship, the Endurance, in an inescapable vise of ice. Their role changed instantly. They were no longer explorers. They were prisoners adrift on a massive moving ice floe, floating at the mercy of the currents. They faced a brutal new reality, enduring temperatures as low as -40 degrees Celsius for months on end, waiting for a summer thaw that might never come. Shackleton abandoned his original ambitions the moment the ice took hold. He pivoted his entire leadership strategy toward a single, agonizingly slow objective: keeping his men alive until the season shifted. By October 1915, the Endurance had reached its limit. The shifting weight of the Antarctic ice pack began to crush the hull. Steel bolts were sheared off like bullets, and the thick wooden ribs of the ship began to snap under the pressure. The crew salvaged what they could as the freezing water reclaimed their ship. They watched from the ice as the masts collapsed and the Endurance disappeared beneath the floe. With the ship gone, Shackleton didn't hesitate. He gathered the crew and made a blunt announcement. The expedition was over, and the new mission was to get every man home. They established Ocean Camp directly on the unstable sea ice. They lived in tents on a floating sheet of frozen water, hunting seals for meat and fuel, while the temperature remained at a lethal -40. Shackleton realized that surviving the ice required a psychological break from the past. By publicly accepting the total failure of the crossing, he gave his men a clear, singular focus: the daily mechanics of staying alive. For months, they drifted on the ice, moving further from their goal. In April 1916, the floe they were camping on finally began to shatter beneath their feet, forcing them into 3 small, open lifeboats. They rowed for 5 harrowing days through freezing spray and ice floes. Finally, they reached Elephant Island, the first solid ground they had touched in 497 days. But Elephant Island was a cage. It was a barren rock, entirely cut off from all shipping routes. With their food supplies almost gone, they knew that no one would ever stumble upon them by accident. Shackleton made a desperate choice. He would take 5 men in a 22-foot rowboat and attempt to cross 1,300 kilometers of the Southern Ocean to reach the whaling stations on South Georgia. They entered the Drake Passage, home to the most violent seas on the planet. For 16 days, they were battered by hurricane-force winds and rogue waves as high as a 4-story building. They were nearly dead from thirst and exposure when they finally sighted the jagged cliffs of South Georgia. They had survived one of the greatest small boat journeys in history. Shackleton's gamble paid off because he understood a harsh truth of survival. Sometimes the only way to find safety is to leave a secure position and directly attack the most dangerous threat in your path. But they landed on the wrong side of the island. To reach help, they had to cross 40 kilometers of unmapped glaciers and mountain peaks that no one had ever dared to climb. Shackleton and 2 men climbed for 36 hours straight, with no gear, sliding down glaciers and trekking through snow. Finally, they heard a distant steam whistle. They had reached the Stromness whaling station. Shackleton refused to rest. he immediately began coordinating rescue efforts, eventually securing a ship from the Chilean government to return for the 22 men still trapped on Elephant Island. In August 1916, he finally broke through the ice to find his crew. Under the command of Frank Wild, the men had survived by overturning their lifeboats for shelter and hunting penguins every single day. Against all odds, every man was still alive. The Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition failed every geographic and scientific goal it set. But in that failure, Shackleton achieved something more enduring. He proved that even when the ice takes everything else, it cannot break a crew that is led with absolute resilience. He returned with every man he started with.
In 1912, the RMS Titanic stood as the largest moving object in the world, a $400 million feat of maritime engineering and luxury. The White Star Line expressed such confidence in the vessel's design, their vice president publicly assured the world it was mathematically impossible for the ship to sink. This confidence was built on two specific features: a reinforced double-bottom hull and 16 individual watertight compartments. The designers calculated that even if water flooded 4 vertical sections entirely, the ship would maintain enough buoyancy to stay afloat. This faith in the ship's mechanical perfection resulted in a dangerous oversight. The creators believed they engineered a vessel that no longer required a plan for human error. 2 days into its maiden voyage, that calculation failed. The ship struck an iceberg and sank, resulting in the deaths of over 1,500 people. We have to ask how a standard block of floating ice managed to defeat the most advanced machine of the early 20th century. Examining the timeline suggests the iceberg was only the final catalyst. To see how the ship actually fell apart, we have to look at the corporate pressures and broken protocols that stripped the Titanic of its defenses before the collision even occurred. On the night of April 14th, the environmental conditions were working against the crew. The sky was moonless, which reduced visibility to near zero in an area known to be filled with massive icebergs. The crew was aware of the risk. Throughout the day, radio operators received 7 distinct warnings from nearby ships about heavy ice directly in the Titanic's path. Despite these alerts, White Star Line chairman Joseph Bruce Ismay pressured the captain to maintain a reckless speed of 40 kilometers per hour. He wanted the ship to arrive early and set a new transatlantic record. When Captain Smith received a printed ice warning that afternoon, Ismay took the paper and put it in his pocket, hiding the danger from the rest of the crew to ensure the ship didn't slow down. By prioritizing marketing goals over basic navigational safety, the company's leadership removed the ship's ability to react to obstacles in time. At 11:39 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet was stationed in the crow's nest. Freezing winds caused his eyes to tear up, further masking the darkness. A massive iceberg appeared directly in the path of the ship, leaving the bridge with only seconds to make a decision. The order was to steer left, but steersman Robert Hitchens panicked. He turned the wheel the wrong way, steering the Titanic directly toward the ice. At 11:40 p.m., the ship collided with the ice. This wasn't a head-on impact. The 1.5 million-ton iceberg grazed the right side, striking the vulnerable single-layer hull instead of the reinforced bottom. This diagram shows the specific damage. The weight of the ice buckled the metal and popped rivets, creating a series of breaches across 6 consecutive watertight compartments. Because the damage reached 6 compartments, it instantly bypassed the 4-compartment limit the engineers had set for buoyancy. The unsinkable design proved useless because the physical impact occurred exactly where the ship was most vulnerable. As the ship took on water, the crew's lack of preparation became clear. Captain Smith had never conducted a mandatory safety drill because he believed the ship's design made an emergency impossible. The evacuation was hampered by a shortage of equipment. To save space on the decks, the company only provided 20 lifeboats, enough for roughly half of the 2,200 people on board. Rescue was only 37 kilometers away. The SS Californian was parked for the night and was close enough to see the Titanic on the horizon. However, the Californian's radio operator was asleep, and the captain dismissed the Titanic's distress flares as a high society party, choosing to ignore the calls for help. Without trained personnel, sufficient lifeboats, and active communication,
Even the best engineering could not save the passengers. By 2:20 a.m., the weight of the water in the flooded bow became too much for the hull to bear. The ship snapped in half and disappeared beneath the surface. 1,500 people were left in the water. At -2 degrees Celsius, the victims succumbed to fatal hypothermia within minutes. While people died in the water, half-empty lifeboats floated nearby, and the only ship responding to the radio calls was still hours away. The massive loss of life was the direct result of specific choices: the decision to cut the number of lifeboats, the failure to train the crew, and the arrogance that ignored incoming warnings. The disaster led to the first global standards for maritime safety. Governments established the International Ice Patrol and signed the SOLAS Treaty to prevent another tragedy. These new laws made it mandatory for every passenger ship to carry a lifeboat seat for every person on board. The ship remained lost for over 70 years until explorer Robert Ballard found the wreckage, resting 3.8 kilometers deep in 1985. Today, the Titanic is slowly vanishing. Metal-eating bacteria are consuming the framework, and projections suggest the entire ship will disintegrate by 2030. As the wreckage disappears, it leaves behind a permanent lesson. The Titanic serves as a reminder that when corporate speed and arrogance override basic safety, no machine is ever truly unsinkable.
On October 12, 1972, a small chartered flight took off for Santiago, Chile. On board were 45 people, primarily young Uruguayan rugby players, along with their family and friends, heading toward a weekend match. While navigating the treacherous weather of the Andes, the pilots began descending into the clouds far too early. The aircraft slammed into a mountain peak. The impact sheared the entire tail section off, throwing passengers into the freezing air and sending the remaining broken fuselage sliding down a glacier. When it finally stopped at an altitude of 3,570 meters, 33 people were still alive. The pilots had severely miscalculated their location. The plane crashed 80 kilometers off its planned route, plunging the survivors deep into the longest, highest, and most brutal mountain range outside the Himalayas. This story explores what the human mind and body are capable of when salvation is permanently off the table. In the immediate aftermath, the 33 survivors followed standard protocol. They assumed help was coming. They tried writing SOS on the roof of the plane. They hauled luggage into the snow to form giant crosses